Hi there, I'm Wendy McCallum, burnout and alcohol coach and wellness expert, and you're listening to Bite Size Balance, where everyday extraordinary women share their stories, expertise, and wisdom, all in the name of lifting each other up and creating a better life by design. Whether it's wellness, career, relationships, food, alcohol, mindfulness, hormones, or parenting, we talk about all things women's balance. If your life looks great on paper, but it still feels like something's missing, you're in the right place. Welcome to Bite Size Balance.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Bite Size Balance. I'm here with Sarah Baillie. Hello, Sarah Baillie.
Hello.
So I want to introduce Sarah today as both the naturopathic doctor that she is and also now the midlife coach that she is. So Sarah has finished her training with the Coaches Training Institute and is launching a coaching practice, which is super duper exciting. I'm really pumped about that. And we're going to be talking today about a really more of a pure, more of a coaching topic, less of a naturopathic doctor topic. And yeah, I'm excited to talk about this. I suspect this episode will get broken into two parts, because we're going to try to keep these episodes a little shorter going forward. So let's just see where we get to today, Sarah.
All right. Super.
You want to introduce the topic?
Yeah, sure. We wanted to talk about women in midlife and how to do less and be more, do less and have more, which is a common issue at the top of many of my clients' minds and your clients' minds as well.
Yeah.
Although, to be honest, I wouldn't say that description itself actually even comes forward right at the beginning. Usually women are presenting with burnout and exhaustion and high levels of anxiety. And this is all tied into hormonal change. It's tied into a major life transition. It's tied into we've talked about before that U-bend of happiness, that statistically women in their late 40s are the least happy than any other time of their lives.
Can you just stop and explain that U-bend just for people who didn't hear? We talked about that. It was probably not even this season, Sarah, but that it might have been, but earlier this season. What is that? What does you mean by the U-bend? It's like literally you're visualizing the letter U, right? And so what's at the top of the U, what's at the bottom of the U, and what's at the other top of the U? That makes sense.
I guess at the top of the U would be on both sides, would be satisfaction, fulfillment, joy, energy, feeling of agency in their lives. And if you're going down from youth to the mid to late 40s, there's a statistic decrease in all of those parameters. And so it turns out that women in their late 40s, so 46, 47, 48, excuse me, which is of course perimenopause, report the least levels of satisfaction, fulfillment, happiness, joy, all of the things, right? And then as time goes on, as they move through, they don't actually, when they discuss this in the studies, they don't talk about perimenopause being a major factor. I have just linked that because of my experience and practice. But as women sort of come through that perimenopausal phase and they're on the other side of that and going into their 50s and 60s, they report a much higher level of satisfaction and fulfillment, or moving towards that at least. So the midlife phase tends to be a time when women are experiencing less of those parameters that we're all kind of seeking, and often stuck in a cycle of exhaustion and stuckness, not being able to move forward, can't get out of their own way, poor sleep, all of the things that contribute to keeping women stuck in that place of not being able to find the things that might give them joy, the things that might give them space. So it can be a very trying time, and often it's all mashed in with the hormonal transition and transitions in life where their children might be at different phases For me, it's with, had sort of beginning of teenagers. For you, your teenagers were leaving. For women at different points in their careers, sometimes their careers are really ramping up in terms of, reaching higher levels of responsibility, while at the same time having high levels of responsibility at home. Things are changing. And so there's just a lot on women's plates. And what I find is that they spend a lot more time in that place of having been nurturing a lot of things and people and organizations and whatever it is that they're where their time has been spent in the last 20 or 30 years. They spend a lot of time doing that and not spending a lot of time on themselves. And so that's where the deficit ends up at that place.
Yeah. And the two of us really in our coaching practices are focused on supporting women coming up the other side from the bottom of the U. As you were talking, I was thinking, yeah, that's what we do. And as a coach, I really try to help accelerate that for women, help women get clarity sooner, help women get unstuck sooner so that they can get to the other side of the U, which is really pretty awesome. And I feel like that's kind of where I am now, but I definitely went through this. And we've talked about that on other episodes. So thanks for summarizing that. I think the other piece that's happening a lot of the time for women is, which we have talked about on many different episodes, and we're not going to really focus in on today, is that all of that stuff is also leading to physical burnout for a lot of women. So women are actually at that place where they've been in sort of a chronic state of fight or flight for a long time. And for all the reasons that you summarized, but also taking care of aging and elderly parents. I just want to throw that in there because it seems to come up all the time with my clients. I would say 50% of my clients right now are concerned about an aging parent or an ill parent or relative. And so that, just puts another caregiving responsibility on us right at the time where we're starting to feel like we don't really want to do that as much anymore, right? Because that estrogen is declining. So we're going to talk about some tools from a coaching perspective that you can use if you're feeling this way to move up that U curve back up to the sunny side of the street, I guess. Yeah. So, and we have a bunch of different things we want to talk about, but let's start with how to say no more often. Now, I do want to say we've talked about some of these things in other episodes, but we never really put them all together like this in one episode, which is what we really wanted to do today. So how to say no more often. Maybe I'll start on that one, Sarah, and then you can add what you step to it once I'm done sort of. So the way that I usually approach this with clients around saying no more often is, I have a bunch of different things I do, but the first thing that we do usually is we start talking about not saying yes on the spot anymore as kind of like an interim step, because for a lot of women, it's very difficult to say no after decades of just automatically saying yes in an effort to keep the peace, in an effort to be helpful, in an effort to nurture and care, in an effort to, not ruffle any feathers, be polite, whatever it is, people please. And so trying to shift someone like that who's been doing that for decades directly to like, no, just stop saying no. Just start saying no to everything is nearly impossible. So the interim step is, if that feels like too much for you, start practicing not saying yes, which is different than saying no. So the idea is that you actually start working on, and usually I say start in a safe space. So maybe it's at home. You start working on catching yourself when you are defaulting to yes and replacing that with something like, let me think about that. Or this is my favorite. I'm not sure if that serves me. I'll get back to you, right? So it sounds really harsh, but if you're doing that in the safe space of your home, you can actually tell your teenage kids, you can tell your partner, you can tell whoever is there that you're in your home, you can say, this is what I'm going to be doing. And I'm working on this because I've realized I just say yes to everything now by default, and it's not serving me. I'm just feeling like I have way too many things on my plate. And I need to get better at setting boundaries. Of course, that is amazing role modeling for your children, because we all want our kids to grow up and not be overwhelmed like we're feeling. And the way to do that is to teach them that it's totally okay to set some boundaries and then to enforce those boundaries. So I think this is just a great exercise for any parent. And I think it's also really helpful in a relationship, obviously, if you don't have kids, but you're in a partnership to to set some boundaries and give yourself the space that you need and start taking care of yourself. So not saying yes on the spot is actually the first step to learning how to say no more often. So that's my first trick or strategy around that. What have you got? What do you say to women?
Well, I love my favorite saying, as you know, is I'm at capacity.
Yes, I love that.
So I don't know where I came up with that, but yeah, I find that myself and other women in my practice in my life have trouble saying I'm too busy, because we have this complicated relationship to busyness in our society.
Yeah.
Where, you know, busyness is still, unfortunately, a badge of honor. And so, and also people tend to think, well, I'm also very busy, you know, right. So there's kind of this dynamic around busyness. It can almost get competitive, the word busyness. And so I really didn't like using that. And somewhere I either heard or came up with, I don't know, the statement, I'm at capacity. And I really encourage women to use that, because for me, it defines my capacity. It has nothing to do with you or anybody else or any other circumstances. It's what my capacity is. So I feel like I'm taking responsibility for what I am actually able to handle at this time. And perhaps my capacity might be that I actually just don't want to go to that thing and I want to read my book. Mm-hmm. And you don't need to know that as the person asking me to do something. Mm-hmm. My capacity for today is that I'm done being with people, mm-hmm. right? I did it the other night. You and my friend Shannon both asked me to go for a walk. Yeah. And I had spent my whole day surrounded by children at Martok, and I didn't want to talk. I was not, you know, I wanted a bath and a book. And so for me, I didn't need to say I'm at capacity for you, but that's what it felt like. I was at capacity for having a conversation. And so to say that, I ended up at the children's hospital that night. So that's another story. But the intention was to honor the fact that I was at capacity for that day in that moment. Mm-hmm. That's another part of capacity that is useful, because it can be very in the present. Right. It doesn't have to be that I'm too busy as a whole, or I'm too busy for you, or I'm too busy for this particular situation. It's simply that in this moment, I'm at capacity. I can't even answer that question for you right now. Right. So it could be any layer or any level of interaction that you can use. Mm-hmm. So that's my favorite. I know some of my patients have adopted it and loved it. So I give it to you, podcast audience. Try it out.
Yeah. And I've passed it on to my clients. I say all the time, my friend Sarah says I'm at capacity. And I think that's one of the best lines. And I would say, you know, you were using that example of a few nights ago when I asked you to go for a walk. And the nice thing is that when you get good at this, so when you get good at being honest about your needs with people that you care about, they get honest with their needs with you. So it's like, it really does kind of, it's like a little snowball effect with this. And you and I have both been working on this sort of in tandem over the last couple of years, just getting better at delaying the yes or saying no. And so when you say things to me like that, I celebrate that on my end. I'm like, great, good for her. Look at her setting a boundary. And I say it to you all the time. I usually say I'm couchy. So I'm already couched, which has now become, what would that be? An adjective, a verb? It's a verb.
A verb and an adjective and a noun.
We have taken the word couch and made it a verb, an adjective, a noun. So I'm either couchy or I'm couched or I'm feeling couchy. And when I say that, it just means I am permanently like adhered to my couch and I will not be doing anything tonight. And I just think it's nice because we're now at a place where there's absolutely nothing about that that's offensive to either one of us. It's just, you know, I sort of expect it every third time I ask you if you want to do something, and you probably expect the same back from me. So this gets easier is my point. And the more you do it, the more people know you as someone who thinks before they say yes, which is actually a really great thing. So that's fantastic. other thing that I talk about a lot around learning to get better at thinking before you agree to something, and learning how to say no more often and to do less, which is really what we're talking about here. I mean, in order to get up the other side of the U, you have to figure out how to do less. That's just part of it, right? Because you can't create the space for yourself to do the things that bring you joy, that make you feel more resonant and fulfilled in your life, if you're just jam-packed with all these things that you're actually resentful of doing and don't want to do anymore. So you have to learn how to say no. And one of the tools that I use it's a really simple tool. I've talked about it before, but I'm just going to recap it really quickly here. It's the 4 Ds, which are defer, delegate, delete, and do. And the idea is that you take those four Ds, let me try to remember them again, defer, delegate, delete, and do, and you apply them to your list of to-dos. So what on this list, or what in my schedule for next week can I defer? So push off to another week. Can I delete? So just get rid of it, make my excuses and get out of it now, because it's always easier to do these Ds in advance. So if you can get into the habit of applying the 4 Ds like the week before the week that is seemingly kind of hellish, then you can actually get yourself out of some of these things. And then the same thing goes with delegation. I mean, it's much easier to delegate in advance, to set up a plan for somebody else, to find a carpool ride for your kid, or to, find someone else to go to that meeting or fill that volunteer spot or whatever. So the 4 Ds are really, really helpful. And then the other thing I talk about a lot is this idea of coming up with a script. So and your script is, I'm at capacity. That's a great example of one, but you can create a script that feels more comfortable to you. And a lot of the times I'm at capacity feels like a lot for somebody to stay right out of the gate. Like, you're very confident, the word I'm going to use for you. You're very straightforward, and that rolls off your tongue. But for a lot of the women that I work with, that would feel hard to say. And so coming up with a script that feels good to you is really important. And the main thing with the script is that it needs to not say yes, and it needs to feel true and honest to you in order for you to deliver it. So I've given the example of some of the scripts that I use. One of them, when my kids were still at home, I would say, I'd love to help with that, but my kids only have a year at home with me before they leave for university. And I'm committed to just trying to spend as much time with them as possible. And that was true. And also not rude at all. And it resonated with people when I said that. Nobody ever pushed back and tried to get me to reconsider. And you can do the same thing around work. My favorite one around work is, I'd love to participate in that or come to that meeting. I have to check my schedule and get back to you. Can you send me an email and just remind me of the details? Because you haven't said yes, it gives you a chance to consider whether it actually does serve you and make sense for you to attend that thing. And if it doesn't, it gives you a chance to formulate like a polite response and email back. Most importantly, you haven't said yes on the spot. So you're delaying the yes. So those are my little tips around saying no more often. I want to talk about kind of energy drains and gains, but I'd love it if you do that one, because that one's up your alley and you talk about that a lot.
Yeah. So you call it energy drains and gains. I sometimes call it like your energy bank account. So in this particular exercise, we make just sort of a list with 2 columns. The one is the things that give you energy, the things that you walk away from feeling full, that you have extra or at least enough. And the drains are the things that make you feel drained of energy. So they deplete your bank account. And those can be anything from actual tasks. So we had a conversation about the fact that making my kids' lunches still is an energy drain for me. That could be a whole podcast episode in itself, but so energy drains could be an actual task. They could also be things like holding on to resentment from saying yes too often. So all of those, the energy drains go on the one side, and then the energy gains go on the other. And there may also be or you may look at this list and find that your energy gains are not nearly as many as your energy drains. And so that's a cue to look at, first of all, how can I apply those 4Ds to some of my energy drains? And then second of all, how can I look at the energy gains that I have and either capitalize on them, spend more time doing those, or try and get into a place, and I know we have an exercise on this later, around figuring out what are some other things that either used to give you energy or things that you dream of giving you energy. What would create that space for you, would create that energy. And so the first part of that exercise is really just making that list. And I would say that that's an ongoing list, because as you're thinking about it, as you put it in your consciousness, you start to recognize through your day, oh, this thing actually gives me some energy. Going for a walk in the park makes me feel like I've got more resources for the rest of the day. The energy drains can show up in all sorts of ways that you may not think originally on your first list. Mm-hmm. And so putting that on the list gives you an idea of how balanced your life is. And so if you are taking more, if the energy drains side is greater, then you are spending more energy than you have. And it's very hard when you're in the U-bend. Yeah. You're usually coming from a place of total exhaustion, right? Mental, physical, emotional, spiritual, everything feels that it's in that, 10% of energy, just enough to keep you going. So sometimes it's very hard to find anything on the energy gains list. And that's what we do to try, and that's what I spend a lot of time currently in my practice and in coaching, also trying to work on how to do more of that, right? And less of the energy drains.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a really good exercise for everyone to do. It's usually very shocking for my clients when they do this list, because as you said, the energy drains side of the list is usually 3 times longer than the energy gains side of the list. But of course it is. We've been taking care of everything and everybody for the last, 20 to 30 years. So, that's where the majority of us end up. And I think it is the explanation, along with, the hormonal and physical shifts that are happening for women, of why we're in the U-bend. Mm-hmm. At the, in our 40s. So, yes, I think that's really, really great. And while it can be very shocking to see that, it also provides you with that thing I talk about all the time as a coach, which is awareness. Mm-hmm. And you need that awareness. You need that kind of shocking moment to propel you into some action. And that's where all the good stuff happens, because that's where you start, you stand in personal responsibility. Okay, I sort of created this. It's not my fault, but this is where I am. What can I do? What is within my control to change, and how can I do that?
Yeah, and it's a source of power, really.
Exactly. Yeah, I was just going to say that's empowering.
Yeah, exactly. You can't possibly get out of the U-bend, mm-hmm. at the bottom of the U-bend, unless you look at this list.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So another thing that we've talked about is how to care less, which is one of my faves. So let me talk about that for a second, because that contributes to this as well. And I am constantly saying this to Sarah, and I feel like I even said this in the context of your kids' lunches the other night when we were talking, last night, I think. So this is the idea, and it sounds so callous, but it's actually not. It's the idea of actually getting aware of how much you're choosing consciously to care about everything, mm-hmm. and to drop some assumptions, which is a huge piece of coaching for me. It's like starting to get clear on where you're making assumptions about the consequences of the way that you're behaving. And so when it comes to caring so much, which often means doing so many things, like making your kids lunches every night when they're teenagers.
You're just going to use me as the example. Okay.
I am. Why not? I have to, because usually you're the good one and I'm the one who's not. So, but yeah, so caring so much that you're doing these things, right? These behaviors, and you're just assuming that is somehow benefiting everybody, you included, and that it's sort of necessary. And if you don't do it, like something's going to fall apart, right? And I think one of the common things that I hear in my practice, and that I used to say as well, and I mean, I probably still say this, to be honest, I'm definitely still evolving in this area as a human, but is something like, I can do this better than anybody else. It'll get done faster and more efficiently if I just do it. It's just easier to do it, right? That kind of a sentiment. And so there's this assumption that if we care less about the thing, that means that something will fall apart. And so I always say, like, with this whole caring less thing, it's really about an experiment. Like, you get to change your mind on this. If you experiment with caring less about something and actually the sky does fall and it's a complete and utter disaster, then you get to go back to caring about it again. But I think we're making a lot of assumptions that are keeping us in that U-bend, keeping that list of energy drains a lot longer than it needs to be. So example from my own life that I was sharing with you last night when we were chatting is that in grade 12, I think my kids were in grade 12, which would have been like last year. As they got older, I just had less interest in the kitchen and in cooking every night, which, was probably just burnout from the kitchen after spending all those years creating recipes and writing cookbooks and all the rest of it. I just didn't want to cook anymore. I was busy. I had my own stuff going on. But I had this belief that I needed to care about that. It was really important for me to care as much as I cared about feeding my kids, my family, some kind of a homemade, nutritious, whole foods meal every night. And so I felt really guilty not doing that, taking shortcuts, and that's one of the things that I realized when I started working on this myself, the fact that I was sort of feeling less than fulfilled and happy, and that there were probably a lot of things I was doing that were contributing to that, including this. I realized I've got to experiment with this. And I started buying frozen pizzas. Every time I went to the grocery store, I put a couple of frozen pizzas in the cart. And we started having frozen pizza 1 to 2 nights every single week, or something like a frozen pizza. I just started buying like prepared frozen meals. And guess what? Nobody cared. Not one person in my family said anything. In fact, if they said anything, it was probably like, ooh, pizza, So I thought the sky was going to fall with that. And actually what that ended up doing was giving me 2 nights where I didn't even think about dinner. It was easy. I could leave a note and say, like, throw this thing in there. And I think as many people listening to the podcast know, the other thing that I did is I started getting my kids to make dinner once a week, which was also a huge help. And it was a pain in the ass. I'm not going to lie. I had to do a lot of supervising, and I had to help them make the grocery list, but then they had their driver's licenses. And so part of the deal was you figure out what you need and you go to the grocery store, you buy it, I'll reimburse you for it. And then you come home and make the meal. So there was a lot of work on my part still involved in that, but actually I didn't have to do the meal planning. They did it. And I didn't actually have to do the actual cooking. And eventually that paid off because it started to get more efficient, obviously. So it's about asking yourself, what are the things I'm caring so much about here? And what happens if I just care a little less? Like, let me just see what happens. Because I also left a nonprofit board I was on that I thought would really struggle maybe without me there, because I'd been on it for a while. Guess what? They didn't care. They filled the seat. It went on, right? Like, we think we're a little more important than we are, I think, a lot of the time. So that's caring less.
Yeah, caring less is, I often have that in my head now because of you. Thank you. Could I actually care less about this situation? I just like to ask myself that question when I'm feeling wound up about something. Could I actually care less about this? So what does it look like?
Yeah.
And I have thought about putting a little sign in my various around my house. Could you care less? But then I know that the teenagers will interpret it in the wrong way and it will come back at me someday. So I'm just keeping that one in my head for now. Yeah. But yes, could you care less? I think that I'm going to be doing that. That's my new experiment, is with my kids and food. And I'm just going to step back, and I'm going to tell them beforehand, like, this is the chef is retiring, and I'm going to cook things that I want to cook when I want to cook, and I'll make enough for you. That's going to be my answer. And I'm going to let go of the fact that they might just eat fries that day.
Right.
That's okay.
Yeah, I think it's great. So, and you can do it. You can do the caring less around interactions with humans as well. And I use it a lot in that capacity, like a moment with somebody that feels, maybe my feelings are hurt, or I'm frustrated with a response or whatever. This is one I use all the time, and it's very helpful. Like, what would happen if I chose to care less about this? And usually the answer is the relationship is actually better for it. because it allows me to put it out of my mind. I don't ruminate and fester on it. And it, it just sort of passes because it's usually an emotion, and I'm just choosing to care less about the circumstances that led to the emotion, not the emotion itself, but the circumstances. And that will often just allow me to hold it a little more lightly, which is kind of my mantra right now. I'm just trying to hold a lot of things more lightly. And it's amazing how consciously choosing to do that can change the way it feels to be you and be in your life. So
yeah, I just on that note, I think that we have to remember that choosing to care less is an active practice.
Yes. Yeah.
It's something that is, I think that it's a skill.
Yes. Agreed. Okay. Let's maybe cover like one more of these things, and then we might break this episode up and try to do. So Sarah and I have been talking about trying to do shorter episodes because everyone's really busy, including us. And I think maybe it might be easier for you guys to listen to shorter episodes and actually get them all in. So I'd love feedback on that, by the way. If you've got thoughts on that, send me a message. Please be kind. But send me a message. I'm always happy to receive your feedback. Okay, so the last one that we could talk about maybe, and this is a bigger one, so this is a good one to end with, is this whole concept of people pleasing, which I don't think we've ever directly addressed on the podcast, but you and I talk a lot about it, and I talk a lot about it as a coach, and you talk a lot about it as a coach. And so that is this idea that somehow people pleasing serves you. So I think women, when I talk to them, get that that's wearing them down, but they're kind of have some cognitive dissonance around it, in that there's a part of them that feels like that's actually really important to who they are. Because, when I get them to describe themselves, like almost every woman says, oh, I'm very kind and generous and thoughtful.
Right.
Yeah. Aren't we all? Like, and so, is that really a personal value, or is that just a learned behavior based on a bunch of social constructs that actually probably don't serve women that well? So the idea of people pleasing is often that it's serving them. So this is the part I really wanted to talk about. It's like, I do all these things, and yes, I get that I'm a bit of a people pleaser, and it's probably is partly leading to my burnout, but I'm helping all these people. And so the place I always like to focus as a coach is, okay, how is that? How's that you're helping these people? And they'll say, oh, well, I'm making their life easier, and I'm helping them when they're in a pinch, and they're, they've got this and that going on, or, whatever. And I'll say, well, how do you think that they would feel if they knew that you were doing this thing, not because you wanted to, but because you felt like you needed to? Or even better or worse, I guess, depending on how you look at it, because you're worried they won't like you if you don't. And when you think of it through that lens, it really shifts a lot. Because the truth is, if you're consistently kind of out there people pleasing, doing things that you're kind of secretly resenting, but doing anyway, you're not showing up in a very authentic and genuine way in your life.
Yeah.
And I, like most humans, form really meaningful relationships with people based on like authenticity and truth, in terms of connection and communication, as opposed to that. And most people do not want people doing things for them if those people don't want to be doing it, me included. So I think it's a good thing to think about if you fall into that category. By the way, I used to, and I think Sarah, I think we all have had periods in our lives when we would call ourselves people pleasers. It's probably the most common thing I hear from women, other than perfectionist. Those are the two descriptive words I hear the most from women when they're describing themselves. People pleasers. That's
what we've been schooled to be.
Exactly. So it's not our fault. But again, once we have this awareness, I feel like it is our responsibility, if we don't like where we are, to start actively working on changing it and really start critically looking at it and experimenting around it, right? And it ties back to the whole could I care less and dropping the assumptions thing. Like, what happens if I actually say to this person, you know what, I would love to help you with that, but I am so tired right now that if I do it, I think I'm not going to enjoy it. What happens? Or if you actually say to your kids, you know what, I realize I've been doing all of this stuff for you, thinking that it serves you, but really it's not serving you. You need to learn how to do these things yourself. And also it's not serving me because I'm feeling really worn down and I'm not really loving it anymore. And I'd rather spend my time doing things with you that I absolutely love and let you start learning how to do some of these things yourself. Right. So I don't know. That's my take on the people pleasing. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, my thoughts are that there's something to this idea of, well, what I hear a lot is, but it makes me feel good.
Right.
And I don't know that that's always true. And I think that we are told that we need to be this way, kind, compassionate, giving, nurturing, all of those things. And, biology dictates that to some degree, as you know, at least I think it does. But I think that because I'm finding it hard to articulate, but because this is how we're schooled as young women, then I think that when we say it makes us feel good, I think it's like, it makes me feel good to tick all these boxes.
Right.
I've been told that I'm supposed to be this. And so when I do these things, I feel good about it. But I think that there's, again, that cognitive dissonance. I think that if women truly felt safe in looking at whether or not they really are feeling good about these things, that in many cases that they wouldn't be. Like, I'm going to come back to the food with me because it's top of mind right now. I can say that it makes me feel good to feed my kids healthy meals and to make their lunches. But underneath it, truly, if I never had to make another meal for the rest of my life, I would be ecstatic.
Right.
And I feel resentment. Mm-hmm. And so there's that dissonance. It's like, I feel I'm ticking the boxes. I'm doing all the things that make me a good mother.
Right.
All the things. And so that makes me feel good. But I don't know that it's surface level feeling good. It's feeling good so that it makes me feel like I'm doing the right thing. But if I'm really looking internally, it doesn't. So I think that with the people pleasing, I think there's a really, like, within yourself, and this is where coaching helps. It's like to really get underneath that feeling of obligation, the feeling of duty, the feeling of, I look this way to the rest of the world, other people think I'm doing a good job, to really kind of get underneath that and like, what are you truly feeling about it?
Yeah. And who are you truly? Because I think a piece of this is an identity piece that happens for a lot of women. And I just want to touch on it because otherwise we'll launch into a half an hour conversation about this. Mm-hmm. But I do see very often when I ask women to describe who they are, for me, they list all the things they do and not actually the things that make them them, so they'll say, I'm a mother, I'm a teacher, I'm a sister, I'm a daughter, I'm a wife, I'm a whatever. They'll list all of the things. And one of them is I'm a helper, almost always, because we've been taught to be helpers. And so I think part of figuring out how to do this less is really working to discover who it is that you truly are and what really lights you up and what you need more of in your life to feel that way. And then it's a whole lot easier to let those other things go because they're no longer your identity. Mm-hmm. And so I guess this is probably a good place for us to break because that's what we're going to talk about in the second part of this episode. We're going to talk about that piece. So how to figure out what those things are, who you really are, what makes you you, what you need more of in your life, what you need less of in your life, right?
Yeah, sounds good.
Perfect. Okay. Thanks for listening, everyone. And we will be back with part 2 soon.
You've been listening to Bite Size Balance with your host, Wendy McCallum. As a burnout and balance coach, I help busy high achievers like you create a more balanced, joyful life. Ready to create a life you don't want to escape from? Download your free Blueprint for Change now. This incredible workbook includes some of my favorite coaching tools and will help you get clear on what you need more and less of in your life. Grab it at www.wendymccallum.com/blueprint. That's www.wendymccallum.com/blueprint.